All right. How's everybody doing? So I just want to start this off and say you're going to see these slides, and they look pretty great. None of that is me. It's actually all of Parity's design team. So when I gave them this presentation deck, it did not look anything like this. So I just wanted to say this is a huge shout out to their design team, the content designers. They did an amazing job. So yeah, let's get started. So I'm John, and I'm here from ChainSafe Systems, and I'm here to talk about guilds. And maybe you've heard of guilds. It's not a new topic. It's not something that ChainSafe developed ourselves. It's something that we borrowed, but we've kind of tried to adapt it to our needs. And so a little bit about ChainSafe. We are a research and development firm. We were founded in 2017. Mostly we're tasked with building infrastructure for some of the most prominent networks like Ethereum, Filecoin, Mina, and of course Polkadot, which is why we're here. And so we are a fully remote organization. We've been fully remote since our inception. We have a headquarters in Toronto, but we have people all over the world now. And so we're not new to this idea of being kind of disconnected in the physical sense. And so really, we miss out on that social aspect of connecting with people since we're all in different places around the world. And so additionally, with COVID impacting the way that everybody has done business in the last 2 years or so, it's been much more apparent how starved people are for that social connection and being able to reach people at that physical level that you're used to. So let's see. Yeah, so the problem here that I'm talking about is really isolation. And ChainSafe is not, like I said, it's not just us that's affected by this problem, it's all companies. And so in efforts to address this challenge of isolation, and being fully remote and missing out on that human element of camaraderie and collaboration, we've decided to kind of introduce guilds to our organization and see if that can kind of bridge this gap. Because it doesn't seem like it's going away for organizations like ours. Like I said, remote work has been in our fabric of how the company was created. And I think this presentation isn't so much about ChainSafe as it is other companies and how they can integrate guilds into their organization. And it's really about getting in touch with your people. And ChainSafe, like I said, this is nothing new, remote work. And we'll get into a little bit later, but it talks about onboarding and how you can make people feel more comfortable, joining a new organization and things like that. ChainSafe works mostly in open source software. So we're always having new contributors come in, and having those people join our organization isn't always so fluid as learning a code base, but learning a code base isn't the same as learning the people that you work with on the daily. And so guilds have simultaneously been really a company initiative to try to help people socialize, but it's also maintaining culture and building culture in a remote work environment. And at the same time, it's about knowledge sharing. And so let's get into it. What is a guild? And so, oops, I can't go back. Oh, I can go back. And so what is a guild? Well, there's an archaic definition. And that is a group of medieval association of merchants or craftsmen, often holding considerable power and considerably cool clothing options. But we prefer the more modern definition, which is a group of people who are able to meet regularly and discuss technology or topics in general. It doesn't have to just be technology. And we discuss it regularly. And so, like I said, it's not just technology. What does that mean? Well, we also have guilds that talk about leadership. We have product guilds. We have front-end guilds. This is a guild about Polkadot. And so, it encompasses all things. But mostly it's just people getting together and talking about something. And they're like-minded individuals. So I like this quote here at the bottom of the screen underneath this corny Shutter photo. But this is from a lady named Caitlin Beagle from the Filecoin Foundation. And in summary, because the text is quite small, she's really talking about the importance of learning and relearning, and she's highlighting the importance of scaling knowledge. Well, how do you scale knowledge effectively across the organization? And our answer to this is guilds. So it kind of segues nicely into why we need a guild. And it's multifaceted. There are a bunch of different reasons why you might want to incorporate a guild into your organization. And we have 4 here that we've kind of highlighted as being the most important in our minds. And so, we'll start with accelerated learning here in a second, and then we'll get into promoting company interconnectedness and continuous integration, as well as like reducing or eliminating points of failure. And so the first point, obviously, being accelerated learning. And so in a survey we conducted last year, we were asking people, kind of what they were interested in learning at ChainSafe and things that if they're not working on something now, what would they like to work on in the future? And one of the things that came up was that people didn't get a chance to work on technology that they weren't working on every single day, if that makes sense. So if someone works on, for example, I worked on the Chainbridge team. And Chainbridge is a modular blockchain bridge connecting typically EVM environments with substrate-based networks. And so because of the work on Substrate that we were doing, we had to become familiar with Substrate and the whole Polkadot ecosystem, and even projects that might be considering using Chainbridge. And so to that end, I actually feel quite fortunate to be introduced to the .Sama ecosystem quite early on. But somebody else coming from, say, the Lodestar team, and Lodestar, for those of you who don't know, is an alternative client for Ethereum. And so those people may not have the exposure to the Polkadot ecosystem that I would, working on Chainbridge and working on we have something called a Chainbridge palette, for those of you who are familiar with that kind of, yeah, this nodding. It makes me feel good. Everybody knows about it. But yeah, you get the idea. Like, people might not have the opportunity and the exposure into that ecosystem. And so what do? They try to learn about it on their own, in their own time. But learning about Polkadot is not the easiest thing in the world for some of us. Maybe other people can learn about it in a weekend, but in my opinion, it's quite complex. And learning about these new technologies, especially a new network, it can be quite daunting. And so really, like, being able to have like a group that meets weekly or monthly where you can go to them and kind of get updates on what's going on in that ecosystem. What are the major projects of that ecosystem? Who are the major people, the players in that ecosystem? What's some of the tooling that exists in that ecosystem? Like, just even looking at wallets. How does MetaMask, well, if you're coming from the world of Ethereum like I am, I'm familiar with MetaMask. I'm really familiar with MetaMask. I'm familiar with the goods and bads of MetaMask. And then, okay, well, what is Talisman? And how does the Polkadot.js, I guess if that's what they call it, the Polkadot.js extension, this is pretty good. I know there's like one developer of the Polkadot.js extension, and he's done an incredible job. But Talisman takes it a little bit further. But there's just too much to learn on your own. And so I think it's important to kind of rely on other individuals to be able to filter that information, especially smart individuals. Because when they get information, they don't just relay it, they have to filter it first. And they say, is this worthy of sharing? Because I'm putting my name behind it. I don't want to tell somebody about something that ends up being fake news, or a really poorly designed, poorly working product. So in that way, when you're surrounded by other pretty smart individuals, they filter information before it even gets to you. And that's kind of the benefit of working at an organization where they have a really strict hiring process of smart individuals. Not talking about myself, please don't misunderstand me. That's the engineers I work with. So yeah, that kind of gives an idea of how accelerated learning can help, and how guilds introduce this concept. The last concept here is improved onboarding. And so if you're a new hire coming to an organization, especially open source, typically your manager is like, okay, here's the code base, just clone it, walk through the README, familiarize yourself with the code base, and then start pulling out issues from the backlog, or maybe they'll be assigned to you. But it mentions in nowhere it mentions about how you can integrate into the lifeblood, the fabric of the company. You can understand the software, and you're going to understand that team that you're working on, but you don't know anybody else in the company. And at least for our company, we have about 100 or so people, and like I said, they're all over the world. Well, if my team is like 8 people, I guess the idea is over time you'll get to learn about people in the organization. But why put something up to time like that? 6 months you might know 20 people. In another 6 months you might know 40 people. Or you could just join rather, basically this internal meetup group and get thrust into this group of people where they're coming from all over the company, and you're being able to interact with a whole different type of people, not just engineers. And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, so I'll leave that for later, but there's a variety of the audience that you're speaking with at these guilds. It's not just engineers. And so the second slide here, the second point, to like our 4 reasons that guilds are great, basically, is to promote company-wide interconnectedness. So I've touched on this a bit earlier in the fact that ChainSafe works on different networks aside from just Polkadot, Ethereum, Filecoin as well, and then of course Mina. And so it's helpful for these individuals who don't know much about Polkadot to be able to come into our world, the Polkadot world, the guild, and it helps them expand their perspectives. For example, people in the Ethereum world still think 721s and 1155s are the greatest innovation for NFTs. They don't know much. Some of them don't know much about nested NFTs. They don't know much about the Remark standard. And so is that something we should kind of, not educate them on, but is that something we should let them in on? I think so. And so I think that's cool to give people exposure into a world that they're not typically used to. And so let's see. Yeah, that just increases perspective. And talking about topics, not only nested NFTs, but also XCM, and then application-specific blockchains that we all know as parachains, and even like feeless transactions. Some of those topics are not things that people outside of the Polkadot ecosystem are used to. And they're certainly not used to like implementing them right now. They think it's like some distant vision, like, oh, XCM might work one day. Well, it's already working. And I think Gavin is supposed to come up after this and talk about XCM v3, which I'm extremely excited to hear about. So it's things like that you start to learn from your peers who are working on this technology every day. Jimmy Johnson was another individual from ChainSafe who was here at the event, and he spoke about Gossamer. And Gossamer is an alternative Polkadot node. And so that whole team within ChainSafe, it's just one team out of maybe 8, and they just focus and specialize on the Polkadot ecosystem. So those people are so specialized in what they're working on. They're a huge knowledge base. And people from the Ethereum, like I said, they were talking about Lodestar and this alternative Ethereum client. These people can benefit from sharing information and sharing knowledge. Then again, they never interact because they're siloed. So how do you get these 2 teams in these 2 different worlds to communicate with one another and share learnings? Guilds. They can bridge. So yeah, let's move to the next slide. This is my favorite slide because integration is one of my favorite words. And so many of you know this topic, and you're going to think this is strange. You can't just take this topic or this like terminology of CI that everyone probably is familiar with, and how like new code gets introduced to a code base. It goes through this like checks that are typically automated and things like that, and then the code gets merged, and everybody's probably familiar with this concept. But why can't this same concept be applied to new information entering your brain? Can't you just be continually integrated into a new ecosystem? And you're basically performing pull requests, like right now. I mean, it's a little bit abstract to think about, but this is really a pull request happening live. I have information that I think you need, you want, and you are, as I'm speaking, it's going through these checks in your brain and saying, okay, I'm going to grab onto that. That makes sense. I'm going to drop that. That doesn't make sense. But essentially, I have information. I think it would be valuable if you have this information as well. You choose to accept it into your knowledge base. So we take a similar approach with guilds, and we think, why can't individuals come in and present information and let people absorb it, just like you do at conferences? And speaking of conferences, it's great to learn about new innovations, new updates to a network, just like XCM v3 we're about to learn about. at these conferences and things like that, but these conferences don't happen all the time. Or if they do, like ETH Denver or DevCon, these are once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year, you can't make it to all these conferences. Usually it's not feasible. Some people, maybe that's their full-time job, but not other people. And so what do? Well, a guild can help kind of bridge that gap as well. It serves as a mini conference that occurs weekly. Our Polkadot Guild meets every single week on Thursday. And other guilds at our company, they take different approaches. Some of them meet monthly. For example, we have a cryptography guild. And this is what I was talking about at the very beginning of this speech when I was talking and saying, like, guilds don't have to just be about technology. They can be about other topics too. Leadership is one of the things that I mentioned or was alluding to. And I guess the idea is how many innovations occur in the world of leadership as compared to the world of Substrate. And that's kind of the notion we're talking about, is maybe Leadership Guild doesn't need to meet every single week. How much information can be talked about? And that's an argument. I'm not going to go there, but maybe a lot. But certainly with Substrate, it's evolving so fast. In my opinion, you can't stay up to speed just by yourself. You need to rely on other people, other peers. And speaking of peers, a lot of the people work at ChainSafe, or a few of them actually, Dan Forbes, Thibaut Sardon, and Phil Lusick, they used to work at Parity. And these people are very knowledgeable when it comes to Substrate on the far right over here. And so these people actually used to write the documentation for Substrate. So they know it better than anybody at ChainSafe. And so who's better to hear about Substrate updates and things like that than from the people who used to write the documentation? That's just an incredible resource to have. And so, yeah, I guess this gets into some of the examples of continuous integration. We talk about the Remark standard all the time. There's so much going on there with Remark 1.0, 2.0. I think they're coming out with a 3.0. And it's just super exciting to talk about that. And like I said, these people from Lodestar and Ethereum world come over and they say, what are you talking about, nested NFTs? Well, Bored Ape Yacht Club is the best thing that's happened to NFTs. And you're going, what are you talking? Have you even heard about Remark? Do you know this person, Bruno? He won the 2021 NFT Innovator Award. Do you know about this person? Do you know about what Remark is trying to do? Okay, fine, stop there. Well, can't you go any further? Do you know about Moonsama and what the stuff they're already doing in terms of how it relates to bridging? On our bridge team, people didn't even know about this. And they're bridging. I think it's really cool. Maybe it's not that cool. I think it's really cool. They're bridging Kusama into Minecraft. Maybe people already know about this, but I think that's pretty sweet. And so it's like, where do you talk about this stuff? A guild is so cool because it's just a meetup group. It's just a bunch of people who are excited about a technology. And they're not convinced that it's going to totally win. It could, but it doesn't have to. And so let's see, another example here. Yeah, I've talked about quite a few. The W3F, of course, like we had members from the technical grants team come in, and they just talked to us. I guess I didn't explain that. Yeah, so sometimes going to conferences isn't enough. We want these, these learnings to happen more often. So what if we bring the conference to us? It sounds a little selfish, but what if we invite these people to come speak at our company, speak to our guild specifically, because it's all under this umbrella of Polkadot. And so we invited these individuals, Bruno, the W3F, members of their technical grants team. ChainSafe largely, I don't want to say survives, it's the wrong word, but we exist off of, we feed off of these grants. And so Gossamer, for example, I was talking about earlier, the alternative client for Polkadot written in Go rather than Rust, we fund Gossamer development based on grants from the W3F. So having individuals from the technical grants team come in and speak at our company and talk a little bit about that whole process. They talk about some of the criteria and groups that they look at and say, this is not something that we would give a grant to, or this is. That's kind of cool, and developers don't always have that insight, because typically it's handled by, like, I don't know, someone from the business development team, say. And some could argue, like, well, do they even need it? It's kind of a distraction. I think it's important because our world is built on relationships, and we've kind of gotten away from that. Like I said at the beginning, we have this problem of isolation, and people are what drive, in my opinion, people are what drive success in organizations. And so how does a remote company continue to build on that culture and continually like build relationships within an organization in a remote working environment. It's very difficult, especially when every team in an organization is rather siloed, working on their own specific network, and they're kind of caught up in this world. It's like, our network is better than yours. Is there collaboration? It doesn't feel like it. So having this guild where everybody can kind of meet in the middle, if you think about a Venn diagram, there's overlap. That's where the guild sits. So yeah, those are a couple examples, but now we get to the last point of like reducing central points of failure. So some of you may be familiar with this concept. I guess it's like a story. They say if you're doing a good job as an engineer, you're writing good documentation, you're also documenting your thought process about how you think, if you're a team lead, I guess, you're documenting your thought process on how you think the product could evolve and where you think it could go, and the next steps for development. And within the code base, I guess, going line by line, you're also commenting really well, so that if a new engineer were to take your place, the proverbial you got hit by a bus, it's kind of morbid to talk about, but at the same time, it's a very interesting point. Are you giving people the best opportunity to fill in and step in your shoes when the captain perishes with the ship, or the captain just decides to leave the company, for example? Does all of that siloed knowledge leave with you? Well, in this way, I mean, it can. I guess the answer to that question, since it's kind of rhetorical, but it can, and it does happen all the time. So what is an organization, what are you, third person, doing to address that problem? Guilds can also solve this because it allows senior individuals to speak to the more junior individuals as well. And you don't even have to be involved in Polkadot, like I was saying. You could come from the Ethereum world and understand, like, have common context or baseline understanding of how Polkadot works at a general level by just attending these guild meetings. And it's not a big deal. If you have an extra 30 minutes in your day, you just sit down in the meeting and say, oh, I learned about XCM and what that means and how that works today. And you just pop in. And I used to work at an actual physical company. I know it sounds crazy, but there was an actual meeting room. And it used to be my favorite thing to just sit in the meeting and hear two people, going back and forth about like some web framework. Like, oh, React is much better than Vue. And I'm like, okay, I don't really have a dog in this fight. I just sit in, fly on the wall, and I walk away with a really firm understanding of both of these web frameworks and the benefits to one or the disadvantages of the other. And I think that's really important, but you miss out on that because we don't have a physical meeting place. So having that kind of like open door policy where this guild meets regularly and people can just pop in and lurk. Lurking is like encouraged. You don't have to contribute, and a lot of people are kind of overwhelmed, with like, oh, Polkadot's really complex. I don't know a whole lot. Can I really join? It's like, of course you can. There's a starting point for everyone. And so I guess that gets into our next topic is really the guild structure is done in a way that everybody can present if they wish. And in this way, it allows people to kind of like hone their presentation skills. And also, I guess my favorite point about this slide and this point is that not everybody within the guild is an engineer. And I was alluding to that earlier, but we have designers, we have operations people, we have marketing people. And so what I'm really saying is we have non-technical people also in the audience. And if you're giving a presentation and you really only know how to just speak to engineers because you're at such a technical level, well, maybe you could work on that. Maybe you have the opportunity now with this like varied audience to provide more anecdotes into what you're saying, and to provide more metaphors and help non-technical people understand these complex concepts. So there's a ton of room for growth, and it's really like a learning sandbox, in my opinion. And so speaking of, I guess, learning sandbox, if you have an organization and you wish to incorporate guilds to your organization, you can get in touch with us. We've done this, it's worked. It hasn't worked in other ways. Basically, we're just happy to share our learnings throughout this whole process of learning about guilds. This is my information at the very bottom. That's my Twitter handle. I handle developer relations for ChainSafe. I'll get out of the way so you can read. But this is my Twitter handle. And guilds are great. They offer a great way for people to kind of have an excuse to take time off of their busy schedules and still do things that relate to the company. Meeting other people from a whole different corner of the organization that they wouldn't interface with every single day. And like I said, you know, when you join an open source organization, they're like, start working on the code base and familiarizing yourself. But what about the 80 other people that work at this company? When am I going to see these people? Once a year at a like when we do an offsite? That's not enough. So, yeah, I think it's pretty clear right now, like all of the benefits that guilds can offer. So, yeah, with that, that's kind of the end of the presentation. I'm happy to take questions if there are any, but thank you for your time.
Can non-biz people join guilds if you're just an enthusiast?
Non-biz people?
Yeah. Non-dev. Non-job.
Yes. Sorry. Non-dev, of course.
Just a fan.
No. Well, what do you mean?
Can fans join guilds?
Actually, yeah, you bring up a good point. So I think I understand what you're saying. Like ChainSafe, so this guild is more of an internal meetup group. I was kind of trying to explain that, but you know, one thing we were flirting with, and we've already tried this, and it's, you know, mixed results, because I think it's a new concept. And really, Polka House, like, I got to give it up to them. They're doing a really great job. And the Kusumerian, I think the other one I was going to mention was the Kusumerian. I can't pronounce it, but it's really cool, whatever it is. The Kusumerian, Jay Shawarma, he's great. He's really great. And it provides people with these, you know, these weekly updates of what's going on. That's perfect. So with the Polkadot Guild, what we tried to do a little bit is open it up so it's a little bit more externally facing. So we let individuals from the community, fans, who aren't a part of ChainSafe, be a part of that conversation. And so we're starting to do more of that. I think that's what you were alluding to, if I'm understanding correctly. We're going to do a lot more of that in the future. Yeah, so just stay tuned. And if not, though, incorporate guilds at your organization, because they're pretty great. Thank you. Oh, there's one.
Quick question. Because I really do like the idea of guilds, and right now our team, I guess in retrospect, like teams that have 80 or 100 plus individuals, we're still kind of small, but I think it would be wise to start to establish a guild earlier while you're small so you can grow and scale. Your guild can scale with it. I'll reach out to you at some point. But do you have any advice on like maybe when size-wise it is good to start looking into guilds, or do you just say like, you know, if you as early, the earlier the better?
Yeah, that's a good question. Definitely smaller the better, much more intimate, and some people don't feel really comfortable about sharing, actually. A lot of people don't feel comfortable about talking, and they want to, and you can tell they want to talk, and you're sitting there, and it's really great when you're early because there's like one other person that joins, and then they're really talkative, and then more people show up, and all of a sudden they just kind of, there are these proverbial shadows that start to exist, and they say, oh, I'm just going to slink away, and then just start lurking. But you know these individuals want to share. How can you start to tease that out? You know, and there's this whole introspection, or not introspection, I guess extroverted, introverted, you know, that whole thing is going on. I think it's just about making people feel really comfortable that the questions they're asking are not stupid. And, you know, especially when you're coming into this ecosystem and you don't know anything about Polkadot and you're coming in from the world of Ethereum or Filecoin or maybe no blockchain experience. Where do you start? Are you going to start with the protocol engineers? I mean, that's a huge leap. So I think helping people feel comfortable and in a small, like intimate setting, I think it's way easier. But yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for your time.